Have you ever noticed that sometimes the biggest obstacle to a relationship isn't rejection? It's self-rejection. Here's an example. A man sees a woman he genuinely admires. She is intelligent, successful, confident. Maybe she's a nurse practitioner or an attorney. Maybe she has a master's degree or she's the CEO of her own company. He sees all of that. And then he looks at himself. And before she's had the chance to smile or they have exchanged a single word, he's already decided the outcome. She'd never be interested in someone like me. So as a result, he never says hello, much less never asks her out. He never gives her the opportunity to make her own decision. And instead, he answers the question for her. That's what I want to talk about today. And honestly, I think this happens a lot more often than people realize. And it's not because women are rejecting these men, but because many men quietly reject themselves first. I'm Becky. I'm a professor of communication. I'm a farm girl from southern Wisconsin originally. Welcome to my little corner of the internet. On my channel, we talk about relationships, social systems, communication, and sometimes how our own thinking gets in the way of the lives that we want. So today's topic has been on my mind for quite some time because I have watched this dynamic play out across generations, including my own family and even in my own marriage. As more women graduate from college than men, conversations about education, ambition, and dating have become increasingly common. In the last several years, every class that I have taught has been at least 2/3 women. And that's just one college, of course, but it reflects a larger trend that we're seeing across higher education. And whenever this topic comes up, I see both both extremes of this. So one side, education shouldn't matter at all, and then other sides insist that education is a huge deal. And I don't think that either position tells the whole story. Because after spending years studying communication and after growing up around marriages with very different educational backgrounds, I think the real issue isn't education. A lot of it is insecurity. And there's an important difference between an education gap and then what I would call an ambition gap. An education gap is easy to measure. So when one person has a bachelor's degree or a master's, or someone else has a diploma from a trade school, maybe somebody never attended college, right? Those are all very objective differences. But an ambition gap is something entirely different. It's the perceived difference in drive, purpose, and achievement. It's the direction someone's life is heading. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. I have known entrepreneurs who never spent a single day on a college campus, but they worked 80-hour weeks building a successful business from absolutely nothing. And I've known skilled tradespeople who have mastered incredibly technical professions that require years of apprenticeship and constant learning. And then I have known people with multiple college degrees who completely lack any and all types of motivation, right? So education and ambition overlap sometimes, but they're not the same thing. And unfortunately, when people start dating, those differences can become very important symbols. So a diploma starts representing intelligence, status, success, worth. That's where problems begin because people stop seeing the person and they start comparing resumes. So I have seen relationships where education was almost completely irrelevant. And the first example I will use is my own parents. They've been happily married and deeply in love for more than 50 years. My mom has a bachelor's degree in education, and my father has a GED. And so for those of you watching outside of the United States, a GED is a high school equivalency diploma. So on paper, that is a very significant educational difference. But in real life, it has never mattered. Their marriage has never been built on diplomas. It's been built on character, loyalty, genuine affection for one another, humor, mutual respect. Growing up in a dairy farm, I learned very quickly that intelligence comes in many different forms. My dad is what I like to call dirt road smart. So you've heard the term street smart. Okay, so my dad is dirt road smart. Here's some examples. So he repaired nearly every piece of machinery on our farm all by himself. If something broke, he figured it out. And he could identify countless plants and explain either why they were thriving or if they weren't. And then he could tell you exactly what that plant needed. He understood weather patterns, and he could just look at the sky and tell you what was coming for like the next couple of days. My favorite memory is that he taught my sister and I how to navigate our way home at night using the constellations in the night sky. And that's not something that you can necessarily pick up in a college classroom, right? That is a lifetime of observation and curiosity. That is intelligence. Doesn't come with a diploma that's hanging on the wall. My grandparents had an even bigger educational divide. My grandmother was one of the brightest people I have ever known. She loved mathematics, history, reading, geography, all different kinds of learning. And she dreamed of attending the University of Wisconsin. She wanted to major in mathematics and history. She grew up in the 1920s. Her parents were farmers in rural Reedsburg, Wisconsin, and they would not allow their daughter to leave home for college. Opportunities for women looked very different in the 1920s and early 30s, so she stayed home. And eventually she married my grandpa. My grandpa was incredibly hardworking, and he was very honest and dependable and a very quiet nature about him. He also could only read at about a third grade level. But together they built a very successful lumber business. My grandmother handled much of the bookkeeping, the paperwork, and a lot of the intellectual side of the business. My grandfather ran the mill, and he supervised their employees. So on paper, they were very, very different, but they were equal partners in life. And each brought strengths that the other one didn't have. My grandma didn't know how to run a mill, right? And neither had to diminish the other in order to feel valuable. Looking back, I think those marriages shaped a lot about how I look at relationships more than any textbook or academic study could. In my own marriage, I have more degrees than my husband, and that has never mattered to me, not one bit. But years after we got together, he admitted something that really surprised me. And that was when we first met. He was very intimidated by my education. And he honestly wondered whether someone with my academic background would be interested in him. And honestly, he said he almost talked himself out of asking me out. Fortunately, he did not listen to that little voice in the back of his head, but instead he found the courage to invite me to go to the Wisconsin-Michigan football game with him in Ann Arbor. Wisconsin won. And that was 16 years ago. And I'm incredibly grateful that he took that chance. Because if he'd listened to that story he had been telling himself, that I was out of his league, we never would have built the life that we have together today. That's what fascinates me about this entire conversation. How many relationships never even begin? And it's not because two people weren't compatible, but because one person decided they weren't enough before the other ever had a chance to decide for themselves. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Why does this happen? Why can something as simple as a college degree make two people who might be perfectly compatible feel like they are in completely different worlds? I think one of the biggest misconceptions in modern dating is the belief that successful relationships are built by matching resumes. Same education, same income, same social status, same career prestige. If those boxes line up, people assume the relationship has a better chance of succeeding. Many studies have found that long-term relationship satisfaction is much more strongly associated with qualities like trust, emotional responsiveness, friendship, mutual respect, effective communication, shared values, far more than educational credentials alone. Degrees can open career doors. They can create opportunities. They can increase earning potential, but they don't automatically tell you how to love someone well. A diploma doesn't guarantee patience or kindness or emotional maturity. Yeah. certainly doesn't guarantee that you'll know how to navigate conflict when life becomes difficult. Those are very different skills. And unfortunately, that's not always how people see it. For many people, education becomes symbolic. It's not about where someone went to school. It becomes shorthand for intelligence, status, success, prestige, and sadly, even personal worth. That is a heavy burden for one piece of paper to carry. Let me give you an example. All right, so imagine you are a master electrician. You've spent 20 years learning an incredibly technical profession. You've completed years of apprenticeship. You own your own business. People trust your work. You have built a comfortable life. You provide for yourself. Your clients recommend you to every person that they know. And by any reasonable standard, you are very successful. And one day you meet a woman who's an attorney, maybe a physician or a CPA, right? A very educated professional woman. Your mind immediately starts racing. She's probably looking for another lawyer. She probably wants someone with a PhD. She would never be interested in a guy like me. Now notice something very important here. She hasn't said any of these things. She just introduced herself. Everything else is happening in his own mind. The rejection he's experiencing is not coming from her. It's coming from the story he created about what she must want. And once that story takes hold, every interaction becomes filtered through it. If she's friendly, she's just being polite. If she laughs at his jokes, she's probably just nice to everyone. If she asks him questions, he's convinced she's only making conversation. And there is no amount of evidence that's going to be enough because he's already decided the ending. And that's the remarkable thing about insecurity. It doesn't just influence how we see ourselves. It changes how we interpret other people. I don't actually think education is what intimidates most people. I think comparison does. Education simply becomes the measuring stick. A man can look at a woman who spent 15 years becoming a physician and think, look at everything that she's accomplished. What have I accomplished compared to that? That's not jealousy. It's self-comparison. And comparison has an incredible ability to erode our confidence. Psychologists sometimes talk about imposter syndrome. It's that feeling that you are somehow less capable than other people believe you are. Dating can produce something very similar. You start to believe that you don't belong in the same room as someone you admire. And it's not because of anything that they have done, but it's because you have decided they occupy a different social plane. The interesting part, they may not see that situation in the same way at all. So while you are comparing yourself to them, they may simply be wondering whether you're kind or funny or trustworthy. You're worrying about your resume. They're evaluating your character. And those are two very different conversations happening inside two people's minds. This is where I think it's important to make a distinction. An education gap isn't automatically an ambition gap. Those ideas often get blended together online, but they're very different. Someone can have multiple graduate degrees and very little drive. Someone else can have a high school diploma, start a business, work relentlessly for years, and build something remarkable. Someone can become an exceptional welder, or a commercial pilot, a master carpenter, farmer, firefighter, small business owner, a military officer. Those careers require discipline, expertise, and continual learning. Success comes in many forms, and college is one pathway, but certainly not the only one. And now, before someone misunderstands what I'm saying, I want to add an important clarification here. If one partner is working incredibly hard to build a career, while the other spends every day sitting at home on the couch playing video games and smoking and watching Netflix and expecting someone else to pay the bills, that is a completely different conversation. And I will make a video very soon about that. And that is not an education gap. That is a responsibility gap. And the internet has a colorful term for those people, and that term is hobosexual, Hobo sexual. All right, I'll leave it at that for today. But for today's discussion, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about two responsible adults who have simply taken different educational paths. Here's another important distinction, because we often confuse education with ambition. All right, so we create barriers that don't actually need to exist. And one of the saddest parts of this entire issue is that self-doubt often prevents people from discovering whether there was ever a possibility in the first place. Because a relationship never starts, a conversation never happens, and a friendship never develops. And it's not because there wasn't chemistry, but because someone quietly decided that I am not enough. And that thought has probably ended more potential relationships than rejection ever has. We're never going to know how many. And this is something important too that I think many men misunderstand. The qualities they believe women value most are not actually the qualities many women are looking for. So let's continue with our master electrician friend here. So he's built a successful business, and he's very respected in his community. He owns his home, financially responsible, and he takes a lot of pride in his work. And then he meets that college professor, and on paper they look very different. So she's got a lot of graduate degrees, and the other, him, he spent a lot of time learning a skilled trade through apprenticeship and hands-on experience. Almost immediately, he begins asking himself questions like, am I educated enough? Do I make enough money? Does she think I'm sophisticated enough? Or would she rather date someone more like her? Right? Those are understandable questions, but they're built on one very important assumption, that she's evaluating him in the same way that he's evaluating himself. And that's where we need to broaden this conversation. Now, of course, women are individuals, and no two women want exactly the same things. Yeah, I get that. Some care a lot more about education, some don't, and some prioritize career success, and others prioritize family life, right? So there's no single checklist for every woman. But I do think there's a pattern worth talking about. Many men spend a great deal of time worrying about whether they measure up on paper. So they'll ask themselves questions like, do I make enough money? Is my career impressive enough? Do I drive the right car? Am I muscular enough? Do I have enough status? Am I educated enough? And many women are asking an entirely different set of questions. Can I trust him? Does he keep his word? How does he treat people who can't do anything for him? Can we have difficult conversations without everything turning into a fight? Is he emotionally mature? Can he communicate without shutting down or exploding? Does he respect my opinions even when we disagree? Will he support my goals instead of feeling threatened by them? Can we laugh together? Do we genuinely enjoy spending time together? Will he be a good father someday? Or if my parents need help, will he show up to help them? Those questions don't appear on a resume, but they're revealed over time. They're discovered through conversations and shared experiences, small moments, the moments that happen when two people are enjoying dinner together, or they're watching a baseball game, or sharing a nice bottle of wine on a Sunday afternoon. And those qualities often determine whether attraction deepens into lasting love. I also think we have to acknowledge something else here. The internet has changed the way many people think about dating, right? There is no shortage of content telling men that women only care about status, like money, height, luxury cars, income, prestige. Now, does financial stability matter? Yeah, of course it does. Responsibility matters. Being able to support yourself matters. Keeping your commitments matters. But reducing every relationship to income or educational credentials ignores something much more important. People don't build lives together because one person has a slightly more impressive resume. They build lives together because they enjoy being together. They trust each other. They have become one another's safe place. If you've been consuming content that constantly tells you you will never be good enough unless you reach some impossible standard, it's worth asking yourself, is that content helping you, or is it simply making you more anxious? Confidence grows when we develop ourselves. Insecurity grows when we're constantly comparing ourselves to strangers. So let's go back to our electrician friend. So imagine he marries that college professor. From the outside, someone might focus on the educational difference, but inside their home, that difference probably isn't the most important thing, right? He understands systems. He solves complex technical problems. He's dependable. He's practical. He's spent years mastering a difficult craft. And she brings her own strengths. Maybe she's analytical. She likes to research. She's an excellent communicator. She's organized. Maybe she's especially good at long-term planning. Those strengths don't compete with each other. They support each other. Healthy relationships aren't competitions to determine who has the most impressive credentials. They're partnerships. One person may be better with finances. The other may be better at fixing things around the house. One may love planning vacations and the other stays calm during emergencies. One cooks. The other does laundry. One remembers birthdays. The other remembers to change the furnace filter. I always forget to change the furnace filter. That's why I got my husband around, right? Different doesn't mean less valuable. In fact, some of the strongest couples I've known have very different personalities and very different strengths. And their success comes from appreciating those differences rather than keeping score. So if you think about the happiest long-term couples you've known, were they happy because they had matching graduate degrees? Probably not. They're happy because they've known how to navigate life together. They solve problems as a team. They probably apologize, forgive, they laugh, they adapt. They celebrate one another's successes instead of competing against them. And when conflict happens, and it always will, they repair the relationship instead of trying to win the argument. And those skills fall under something called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence frequently has a much higher impact on the day-to-day quality of a marriage than educational achievement. You can have two people with doctorates who communicate terribly. You can also have two people who never attended college and have an exceptionally healthy marriage. Degrees tell us something, but they certainly do not tell us everything. Which brings us to what I think is the real obstacle in many of these situations. Not the education gap itself. It's what happens when insecurity quietly takes over. And if I had to summarize this entire discussion, it would be this. The greatest obstacle usually isn't the education gap. It's insecurity. Because once someone becomes convinced they aren't enough, everything gets filtered through that belief. And a compliment feels like pity. An interest feels impossible. A disagreement becomes proof that you're somehow inferior. And if a partner's accomplishments start feeling threatening instead of inspiring, that's what insecurity does. It quietly rewrites reality. Instead of seeing yourself as someone's equal, you begin acting like you're interviewing for a position that you don't deserve. And that is an exhausting way to build a relationship. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance says, I'm better than everyone else. Confidence says, I know who I am and I don't need to compete. A confident man can admire an accomplished woman without feeling diminished by her success. And likewise, a confident woman can appreciate a man's competence, integrity, work ethic, and kindness without caring whether he has a college degree. Secure people don't spend their time keeping score. They're not constantly asking who's more successful or who makes more money, who has the more impressive title. They're asking a different question. How can we build a good life together? One of the things I hope we've learned as a society is that success doesn't have a single path. Some people find it through universities, some find it through military service, some become entrepreneurs, others dedicate themselves to skilled trades. and some build family businesses. Others pursue creative careers in music or art. And many people spend decades mastering professions that never require a college degree, but demand extraordinary knowledge and discipline. And every one of those paths requires sacrifice and learning. Education matters, and I've devoted my career to it. I believe deeply in learning, but education is only one part of a person's identity. It doesn't tell me whether they'll remain faithful when life becomes difficult. Those are matters of character, and character isn't awarded at graduation. It's developed day by day, decision by decision. And when I think back on my own life, I keep coming back to that football game in Ann Arbor. 16 years ago, my husband almost let insecurity make the decision for him. He wondered if my education meant that I wouldn't be interested in him. He questioned whether we belonged in the same world. And he almost believed the story that I was somehow out of his league. And thankfully, he asked me anyway. And I gave him the opportunity to answer the question. And he gave me the opportunity to answer the question for myself. And I'm so grateful that he did. Because if he had listened to that little voice telling him he wasn't enough, we wouldn't have built the marriage we have today. Whenever I think about my parents' 54-year marriage or my grandparents' marriage, I see the same lesson repeated over and over again. Education shaped their careers, but it did not determine the quality of their love. That came from somewhere much, much deeper. It came from respect, from loyalty, from true friendship and shared purpose, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. Those are the qualities that endure. So if you've ever looked at someone and thought, no, she's out of my league, I want to leave you with one question. Did she actually tell you that? Or is that simply the story you've been telling yourself? That self-doubt has a remarkable way of closing doors that were never locked in the first place. So don't answer someone else's question for them. Take a chance. Character still matters. It always has. And I believe it always will. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to have you as a member of my little community. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Here we're going to be talking about relationships, communication, and the science behind human connection with a little bit of Midwestern common sense mixed in. So please like and share this video, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Please share your own experiences on this subject. All right, I will see you next time. Have a great day.